Welcome back to another Handsome Guys Talk Hoops. We're here reacting because that's what we do in our spare time. We react to content. These are YouTube exclusive. If you're here from the How About Them Celtics podcast, don't worry, we still do that too. We just do this as well for extra YouTube content. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. And today, the hottest news on the market is Mr. Christopher Emmanuel Paul. I think his middle name is Emmanuel. I don't know why I know that.
I don't know why you expect me to know that.
I'm pretty
You're
sure.
like asking a question like I'm going to have an answer.
I'm pretty sure the middle name is Emmanuel, Christopher Emmanuel Paul, who might be waived by the Phoenix Suns. There is some question mark, I think, surrounding it. Chris Haynes saying he's going to be waived. Sham saying he might be waived. Sam was laughing at it because Chris Haynes is apparently not the most... evidently, he's not the most reliable source. He does a lot of jumping the gun. He really wanted to be first, but Chris Paul may or may not be waived by the Phoenix Suns. And so we're just going to have to see where he goes. A lot of people thinking he might just end up back in Phoenix. He might resign. But if he doesn't, Dan Favale of Bleacher Report compiled a list of the top landing spots for Chris Paul when/if waived by the Phoenix Suns. So let's take a look. As you can see here, Chris Paul is leaving the Phoenix Suns probably, and this probably just links to Shams' tweet, which is funny. But the first one, for those of you who listen to How About Them Celtics, is the Celtics. The Boston Celtics as the top destination for Chris Paul. And basically the argument is the Celtics have built a title roster with it, but they don't have an alpha passer or offensive organizer. Imagine what they could do with CP3. We talked a bit about this on the show, but what do you think?
You know, I do think adding Chris Paul would give the Celtics increased flexibility if they want to move that way, right?
Sure.
There's very well a chance that they don't want to make any major moves this summer. To me, it would make sense if that was the case because you don't have a ton that can still be done to this roster. You have made the time to get over the hump move and bringing in Brogdon, whether you believe Brogdon is the answer or not, which you don't.
I don't.
They have made the move. They've made the move last summer, which we thought was the final push. And it felt like they were there. They didn't execute. They didn't play well in the playoffs. And when they eventually got bounced, Brogdon had a big fat tear in his forearm on his shooting hand. So it kind of is yet to be determined. Of course, he was not perfect leading up to that. But again, if you bring in Chris Paul, you have an extra, at least starting caliber guard. He's probably around the same level at this point in his career as the other guards on the team. You could move one of the other three to bring in a wing to give you more depth there if that's really your cup of tea. It makes sense. And it makes sense why people are like, yeah, Chris Paul to the Celtics, why not?
I agree, and I know we talked about this on the show too. Only do it if you sign him. Don't trade for Chris Paul. Not that at that salary. I think that's a terrible move. But having Chris Paul in the mix to organize the offense would be smart. As Dan Favale talks about it, he would be the perfect addition to an offense that, despite ranking third in half-court efficiency, too often descended into turbulence. I think he would probably be the perfect guy. I mean, you hear Celtics fans all the time say, hey, let's get somebody like Chris Paul to organize the offense, so why not go out and get the Chris Paul? He's 38, I think, at this point, so he's definitely getting up there. However, he would definitely organize things, right? And it would make a lot of sense to bring him on to organize the offense with Tatum and Brown at the helm. Realistically, though, unless Marcus is comfortable taking on a backup role or you're trading Marcus in that other deal for a wing instead of Brogdon, which I don't know if we're a fan of, then I don't know how much I love the Chris Paul addition, because I think in order to be at his best, he would probably need to start so he can organize the offense that way. But an interesting idea at the very least. The second one is the LA Clippers. Here's a picture of Russell hugging Chris Paul, which is funny because Chris Paul would probably take his job. Reasonable minds can disagree whether the LA Clippers actually need a point guard. The team clearly thinks they do. Kawhi made as much known at the trade deadline, and LA scooped up Russell Westbrook. And in fairness to Russ, he played pretty good for the Clippers in his time there. But if you look at the Clippers in the sense that they're kind of similar to the Celtics, i.e. two wings, and they kind of need somebody to organize things, I think that's where it makes sense to bring Chris Paul in. So I like the Clippers as a landing spot, depending on what they do with Russ.
Also, the Clippers have no reason to take the foot off the gas when it comes to trying to bring in support for Leonard and Paul George, because they kind of don't have any draft picks to fall back on. So they have to
Also
keep it
true.
going. They have to continue to try and compete in order to all like kind of spite OKC, but also just ensure themselves the best case scenario. Because if they're losing, they're getting nothing from it. They can't tank, and they're paying these guys a ton of money. With a new CBA, they're going to get screwed eventually because both Leonard and George are making Supermaxes, I believe.
I think they're both on. Let me check their payroll.
They're making a lot of money. Make no mistake. Adding Chris Paul, I believe you mentioned this, for the Celtics could be a way to alleviate the cap because after this upcoming season, 23-24, he's not guaranteed anymore.
You can waive him, yes. And for the Clippers, they're not on like $20 million contracts, but they're both on the same deal. It's going to be 45-6 next season, and then they both have player options for 48-7 the season after that. So they're on like a max deal, but it's not like the super 50-60 mil max.
It's the old max.
Yes.
And also, Marcus Morris makes like $17 million.
Yep, heading into the last year.
And he's just hanging out.
Yeah.
So I think Chris Paul going to LA, at least the Clippers, would also have to be via buyout. And not through I guess they could trade for him.
If anything, you could trade like Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, and one of their like Amir Coffey or something for him. And honestly, that might be better off for the Suns anyways, right? You talk about a deal, you could do like you could do Eric Gordon and Marcus Morris for Chris Paul and Landry Shamet pretty easily. And in all honesty, that might make the Suns better and the Clippers better, right? You get rid of some of that depth. For the Clippers, maybe they'd rather keep Eric Gordon and give up 2 wings. But then for the Suns, they get some extra depth in there. They get off that Shamet contract. Morris is going to be an expiring, so is Eric Gordon. They get 2 expiring deals. That could help them out. The Clippers would still have Norm Powell, Covington, Batum, Zubac, Bones Highland, Terrence Mann. Like, they'd still have plenty of depth, and they'd have this point guard in Chris Paul and Landry Shamet, who was Landry Shamet on the Clippers? Am I losing my mind? I think he was.
So was Chris Paul, if you forgot.
Yes. Yes. But they're one of the teams I feel like where a trade could actually make some sense given how many expensive contracts they have. Not that they would rather do it that way, but still.
And also Phoenix's need for some kind of rotation.
Depth, yes.
So they didn't really have any in the playoffs, and it was ultimately part of their demise, if not the entire thing.
100%. And you see Dan Favale talking about whether the Clippers can afford Paul remains to be seen. Their payroll exceeds the second luxury tax apron, so they won't have their mid-level, et cetera, et cetera. Paul will have richer offers. So if anything, since they don't have their mid-level, it would have to be a minimum deal or a trade, which again, if there's any team that could pull off a trade, it'd probably be the Clips. But moving on to the next one, the most obvious here is LeBron and his buddy Chris Paul. The Lakers, the other LA team, also make a ton of sense for Chris Paul. Chris Paul joining the Lakers makes sense, if only so he can announce the decision, citing basketball reasons as the driving force. If you don't know, that is the joke that Adam Silver or David Stern made when he vetoed the Chris Paul to the Lakers trade for basketball reasons. This would be a long time coming, I suppose. It makes sense. The Banana Boat crew finally playing together. LeBron and Chris Paul. The last member LeBron hasn't played with, I believe. He played with Melo. He played with D Wade. Hasn't played with Chris Paul yet. They need a point guard. The ending to their season with D'Angelo Russell wasn't exactly a happy divorce. It's probably spiraling towards not coming back. I don't know.
Back.
Yeah, shout out Dylan Brooks. And the upside to that is they could probably afford to give him that mid-level because they don't really have anybody else on the roster outside of AD, LeBron, and I think Max Christie is the only other guaranteed contract they have. So they could afford to give him a little bit of extra change that other teams could give him, and it would make sense for the makeup of the team. Plus, they'd still have some money in room to work with. So as much as I know you don't love the Lakers, us as Celtics people, this probably makes the most sense out of any fit in the league.
I think from a basketball standpoint, it might make the least sense.
How so?
Chris Paul, how great is he at playing off the ball? Not great.
That's fair.
Playing alongside LeBron. Yeah. I mean, you run back into the Westbrook issue where...
You're right. I see it.
I don't know if Chris Paul has the same type of hard-headedness as Westbrook seems to. it doesn't mean that Chris Paul is the most malleable guy either. He obviously is strong-willed and has opinions and is a smart player. But if he's going to play next to LeBron, it doesn't make a ton of sense. They both need the ball in their hands to be at their best. LeBron has proven throughout the playoffs this year that he's okay to play off the ball. But if you're the Lakers, I'd rather have LeBron with the ball in his hands than Chris Paul all the time. Also, Chris Paul, not the greatest outside shooter, which is another reason why if you're looking to bring him to the Celtics, it might not make the most sense. He's not going to fit into the offense. He's not playing off of LeBron here, catching, shooting, and contributing to winning offense. It's just not happening. If Chris Paul is going to go to a team, it's going to have to be a team where, almost like an OKC, where he has to kind of will the guys for it to be effective. That's how I feel.
Yeah, no, I can see it, I guess, on second thought. He does need the ball in his hands. I just think there's a team, needs a point guard. Chris Paul, he's not the best outside shooter. He shot 37% last year, which is actually not as bad as I thought it was, but I think we're all remembering the season prior where he shot 32%. Obviously not great, but if you do trade for Chris Paul, you do probably want him with the ball in his hands more often, which maybe wouldn't happen as much in LA. Although if there was anybody LeBron might be comfortable with giving the ball up to, it'd probably be his buddy Chris Paul, who is arguably one of the best playmakers ever, I would say, easily.
People love Chris Paul.
I mean, deservedly so. He's a beast. He's the point guard for a reason. But the last, let's look at what Favale had to say here. CP3's close ties with LeBron are part of the equation. More than that, Lakers are desperately in need of another offensive organizer. I could see it in that sense. Maybe they need an extra player to play make, because you can't just rely on LeBron. Kind of like what we saw with Luka. Like, you need a Jalen Brunson or Spencer Dinwiddie next to him, or Kyrie, I guess. But I don't know. Makes some sense. But the last landing spot, which I know you were confused about because we looked at this last night briefly, the Milwaukee Bucks are the last landing spot Dan Favale list for Chris Paul. Let's just read a little bit here. Picture a closing five of Giannis, Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, and Chris Paul. Holy crap. As good as the Milwaukee Bucks are at their absolute apex, their half-court offense could use another primary playmaker who doesn't shrink the floor. That's true. The Bucks were not a very good half-court offensive team. I don't know necessarily if Chris Paul is the right fit because of how ball dominant he is, but I don't really know
if Chris Paul doesn't shrink the floor. We just talked about that.
Well, he shot 37%, so it's not like he's a Russell Westbrook or a Ben Simmons, right? Like, he's not completely closing things out. He can still make some threes. I don't know if it's the perfect fit. I might rather have a they're not free agents, but like a Peyton Pritchard or Jordan Clarkson, who's like a better shooter who can also handle the ball, rather than somebody who can handle the ball and can also shoot, if that makes sense. Like, where shooting is probably their primary thing and playmaking is also a good thing that they do, rather than the other way around. But I can understand why Chris Paul would make some sense, especially because he's just kind of available, right? Because they can go out and get him for a minimum or whatever. And I think that might be the draw for a lot of these teams. Just like, well, if he's out there, he can help us and he's willing to come here, why not give it a shot? Which, fair enough, right?
I think if you're Milwaukee, you have Jrue Holiday, who's done a fine job of being that team's point guard. He was the point guard when they won the title 2 years ago. He continuously, seemingly like revives his career. Not that it was ever super dead, but
no, he's great.
I mean, he made his first
awesome.
All-Star appearance in 10 years this year?
Is Jrue Holiday a top 5? Not top 5, top 10 point guard in the league?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he made the all-defensive team. He averaged 7+ assists on this team?
19, 5, and 7.5.
Yeah, he's obviously doing a good job handling the ball. If you're Milwaukee, your need is not a Chris Paul. It's more of a, oddly enough, sharpshooter Eric Gordon. Not to start, but that type of player.
Like I said, Jordan Clarkson, Peyton Pritchard. I think those are that archetype of player. And I'm not saying,
but even then, you don't even have to go small or like a point guard in that case. You just need a shooter. Let's say Max Strus maybe would be a good fit.
Sure. Yeah. I can agree with that. I think the argument Dan Favale is making is they don't really have another playmaker in that starting lineup outside of Jrue Holiday. Like, obviously Giannis can play make, but in the sense of like handling the ball and creating the offense, they don't really have another guy comfortable doing that, because Grayson Allen has been starting at their 2 guard. Even before that, it was like Dante DiVincenzo, neither of which are the best ball handlers. I mean, a quick look at point guards in free agency, like the Bucks aren't going to have a ton of money, so I think that's why it's like, okay, Chris Paul is available. Would he come here on a cheap contract? Like Javon Carter is pretty good for them. He played for the Bucks, but he's a little too small, I would say, to start next to Drew Holiday. Although they're both great defenders, right? They get a Gabe Vincent in there. He's more of a 1, maybe a little too small to run the 2. Drew Holiday, I think the appeal of Chris Paul is Drew Holiday is big enough to run the 2 guard. So you bring in Chris Paul, he can be your 1. Drew Holiday very comfortable off the ball. Maybe that's the sort of argument there. But if you look at like 2 guards available, like would you rather have Chris Paul or would you rather bring in a Josh Richardson or a Seth Curry or Josh Okogie, right? Like one of these 2 guards who can either defend or shoot really well or both next to Drew Holiday. And I think that's the argument. But it just depends on like how much is Josh Richardson going to command in free agency? How much is Seth Curry going to command in free agency versus how much is Chris Paul, right? Like who do you think gets more money, right? Does 38-year-old Chris Paul garner more, or does Josh Richardson, Seth Curry, cost more money? And in my opinion, I think like a big reason Chris Paul could be the option is Josh Richardson's probably going to get like 12 to 15 mil. Chris Paul's not going to get that because of his age. So like at that point, you're weighing the cost. And is Chris Paul the perfect fit? No, but if he's available and he wants to win a title, you'd be hard pressed to find a more title ready team than the Bucks who could also utilize his skill set in some way. I think that's like,
I guess it just doesn't make sense to me.
Sure. Fair enough. Any other teams you think would be a good fit?
Phoenix.
Yeah. Obviously. What about like any other teams outside of Phoenix?
I know you like
that
Philly.
weren't listed there. I think Philly only if James Harden leaves though. I mean, it doesn't make too much sense because you need the ball in his hands and you also have Maxey there. And honestly, on second thought, a Chris Paul Tyrese Maxey backcourt doesn't sound appealing to me. It's a little small. That's a bit small, but
is this get ready to learn Chinese Chris Paul?
No, I think there's a place for him. I think the Clippers, the Lakers make sense. I think if nobody scoops him up, like the Bucks could make it work. I don't think obviously Chris Paul wants to win a title, but I don't think he would, like, if he doesn't get an offer from a title team, I don't think he'd just dip. So like then at that point you could look at, okay, maybe the Bulls need somebody to run their offense, or the Rockets I know there was something about the Rockets potentially wanting Chris Paul. That's if they didn't get James Harden. So like I think there will be a landing spot for Chris Paul. Like hell, the Magic could use him to bring him in, right, to run their offense, be a nice veteran point guard. So not ready to learn Chinese, but there'll be a place for Chris Paul. It'll probably be Phoenix, but if we're getting funky with it, we'll look at all the options. But I think that's about it. Thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll let Sam take us home.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching. You are on the YouTube. These are YouTube exclusives, so make sure you subscribe if you want to see more of us talking about hoops and some guys talk hoops. You can follow the social medias at How About Them C's. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, we're there. Facebook is just the name of the podcast. You can follow Jack at JackSimoneNBA on Twitter. And you can follow me at Sam LaFrance NBA. That's it for us. Bye.